New York City, 1892, 11 stories above Broadway. 4 men balance on an 8-inch beam with nothing beneath them but open air. One man reaches into the mouth of a coal forge with a pair of tongs, burning at nearly 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, pulls out a rivet glowing white-orange and throws it 30 feet through the wind. A second man catches it in a metal can. A third rams it into a hole before it can cool. A fourth beats it flat with a hand hammer again and again until the glow fades to grey. Often in little more than a minute, that piece of iron will help hold up a skyscraper. By the early 1890s, New York was racing to build taller than its own building code had ever imagined. For centuries, a tall building meant thick masonry walls. The Monadnock Building in Chicago, completed in 1891, needed brick walls 6 feet thick at its base just to hold up 16 stories. A steel skeleton changed the math entirely. Instead of masonry doing the lifting, a cage of iron and steel could carry a building's full weight, floor after floor, while the exterior walls no longer carried the building's structural loads. But a skeleton is only as strong as the joints holding it together, and in 1892, hot riveting was the standard, trusted method for joining 2 pieces of structural steel for good. The 4 men on that beam were almost never strangers to each other. Riveting gangs were often recruited from a single immigrant community, often Irish in New York in these years, because the work depended on trust and instant, wordless coordination over the roar of hammers and wind. A typical gang paired an experienced heater, sometimes 10 or 15 years into the trade, with a newcomer barely off the boat, still called a greenhorn by the older hands. Experienced gangs could rotate duties, though most men specialized, and the riveter swinging the hammer generally commanded the greatest respect, since the job demanded enough stamina that admitting exhaustion and asking for relief could cost him his standing. Many of these men lived within walking distance of the site, in tenement rooms shared with several other boarders, because a labourer's wage left little room for anything else. Work began each morning with the forge. A rivet furnace, usually a small coal or coke fire built into a portable box, sat on planking near wherever the gang was working that day, sometimes cantilevered out past the edge of the frame itself. The heater kept dozens of rivets moving through that fire at once, judging temperature purely by colour. Dull red was too cold to drive properly, while cherry red shading into orange, somewhere around 1,800 to 2,000 degrees, was ready. Push it into full white heat, and the rivet itself could be damaged before it was ever driven, its grain structure coarsening and its surface scaling away. There was no thermometer on the job. The heater's eye was the only instrument that mattered. Once a rivet reached colour, the heater pulled it from the fire with tongs, knocked off the loose scale, and threw it, sometimes 30 feet or more, to the catcher, who caught it in a metal can or a leather-lined bucket, since bare skin against a rivet at that temperature meant an instant burn. The catcher spiked it with his own tongs and rammed it through the rivet hole while it still glowed. On the far side, the holder-on braced a heavy iron dolly bar against the head to keep it from moving. Then the riveter went to work, driving blow after blow with a hand hammer and a steel die called a rivet snap, hammering the protruding tail into a second matching head. A skilled 4-man gang could drive several hundred rivets in a single day, all 4 men moving in the same rhythm, hour after hour, above open air. What almost nobody outside the trade understood was what happened after the hammering stopped. As the rivet cooled, it did not simply harden, it shrank. That shrinking pulled the 2 steel plates together with a clamping force greater and more reliable than contemporary bolts could match. It is the reason a hand-driven rivet from the 1890s can still be found gripping its plates in buildings standing today. But the same principle cut both ways. A rivet that had cooled too much before it was driven would not shrink enough to clamp properly, and a loose rivet buried inside a joint 11 stories up was invisible from the ground and from most of the building around it. Finding one later meant chiseling it back out and starting the whole sequence over, one hammer blow at a time. None of this ran smoothly all the time. Falls, burns, and crushed limbs were a routine feature of New York's construction sites throughout this period, well documented in newspapers and municipal reports, even before the city had built anything resembling a skyscraper. By the 1890s, with riveting gangs working routinely at 10, 15, 20 stories, the same hazards simply moved higher. A missed catch could burn straight through a glove. A rivet snap slipping on a wet or icy beam could put a man's own hammer through his hand. A lost foothold on a beam 6 or 8 inches wide with open floors below and no harness or net between was rarely survivable. Most weeks, most gangs finished without serious injury. Not every week did. The men who kept working after a bad one did not talk about it much. They went back up the next morning because the gang needed 4 men and because the wage was still better than many other forms of common labour open to them. What these gangs built, rivet by rivet, was the physical proof that a building no longer needed thick walls to stand tall. Within a decade of frames like this one, steel skeletons were going up in Chicago, New York, and dozens of American cities, and the modern steel-framed skyline became possible because riveted joints had already proven they could hold. The price for that proof was paid almost entirely by men whose names rarely appeared anywhere except a payroll ledger, or, occasionally, an accident report. Many contractors increasingly relied on immigrant crews for this exact job, labour treated with suspicion in half the city's other industries, but trusted here, on the open steel, to get it right. Many of the buildings these early gangs riveted together are long gone, torn down for something taller within a generation or two, but their joints often outlasted the buildings around them. When an old riveted frame is finally dismantled today, engineers sometimes find rivets from the 1890s still tightly gripping their plates, the same thermal contraction that clamped them shut in a single afternoon still holding, well over a century later. The men who drove them left almost no individual record behind. What they left instead is harder to erase. Tens of thousands of small, cool pieces of steel, each one a minute or two of somebody's work, still doing the job they were hired to do. These techniques shaped American cities quietly. If you'd like to see more of them preserved, consider subscribing, and tell us which forgotten technique we should uncover next.